My name is Olivia Reynolds, and at my father's retirement dinner, my parents stood in front of everyone and disowned me publicly. No warning, no explanation, just champagne toasts for my brother and silence for me. They left my name off the speeches, off the family photos, off their legacy. But what they didn't know was that I had already uncovered their secrets, hidden debts, shell companies, and the truth that their precious family business now belonged to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I arrived early at the Westlake Country Club, not because I was excited, just because I wanted to see if they'd really do it, if they actually had the audacity to make it official. The sun was setting over the manicured golf course, painting everything in golden light, as if congratulating everyone except me. Business associates in tailored suits mingled near the entrance. Parents clutched gift bags, embossed invitations, and glossy programs. I held nothing, just my breath. When I spotted my parents near the reserved seating, I walked slower. My mother Diana wore a cream designer suit and her usual calculated smile. My father Richard had his reading glasses perched on his head, one hand scrolling through his phone, one foot impatiently tapping the marble floor. My brother Marcus stood between them, polished in his custom suit with that smug expression he'd perfected since childhood. Reynolds Industries' golden child. They didn't notice me right away. When they did, my mother's eyes skimmed me like I was someone she vaguely recognized from her country club. "Oh, Olivia," she said flatly. "You came." "I got the invitation," I answered, ignoring the chill in her tone. She gave a practice laugh. "You must have seen a forwarded version. I wasn't sure the RSVP list made it that far." My father didn't speak. He just checked his watch. Marcus opened his arms for a brief hug, and I leaned in out of habit. "You look nice," I told him. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I'm glad you're here." But his eyes were darting sideways, watching our mother, always calculating how much warmth he was allowed to show. I scanned the seating chart posted on the gilded easel beside the entrance. "The Reynolds family," it read in elegant calligraphy. Beneath it, "Richard, Diana, Marcus plus 2 guests." I searched for my name. It wasn't there. Someone handed me a badge, white. No family logo, no ribbon. Just the word guest, in serif font. I stood for a long time staring at that badge. I'd helped my father design the original company logo when I was 19. We spent a week perfecting the typography. I should have left. That would have been the logical, self-respecting thing to do. But instead, I clipped the badge to my dress and walked toward the banquet hall like a ghost showing up to her own funeral. The dinner began promptly at 7:30. A few speeches came and went. Board members, executives, investors. I sat alone at a table near the back, next to an elderly couple who kept asking whose side of the family I was from, and a distracted woman checking her phone under the table. Then Richard stood and stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and smiled like a politician about to make a campaign promise. "Today," he began, "we celebrate a momentous transition for Reynolds Industries. After 40 years at the helm, I'm passing the torch to the next generation." Polite applause. Camera flashes. Marcus looked down modestly. But Richard continued. "This day also marks a necessary shift for our family. A realignment of values, priorities, and legacy." My stomach dropped. "We've made a difficult decision. From this day forward, we will no longer be extending ourselves to those who do not align with the integrity and vision we hold for Reynolds Industries. That includes our daughter, Olivia." Silence. No gasps, no protests, just a ripple of awkward coughs and rustling fabric. I didn't stand. I didn't cry. I sat there with my hands on my knees, suddenly very aware of every nerve ending in my body. My ears buzzed. I stared at the edge of the stage. Marcus didn't say a word. Someone at the table behind me whispered, "Did he just say?" Another voice, "Who does that at a retirement dinner?" I swallowed, turned my face slightly away from the stage, and forced my jaw to stay still. The speech continued. Something about investments, future, roots and weeds. I couldn't track the words anymore. Eventually, I stood up and quietly walked out of the banquet hall. Not rushed, not shaken, just methodical, like it had happened before. Later, at the reception, I tried to find my seat for dessert. There was a table labeled Reynolds and Guests. I walked up to it, scanning the name cards. Nothing. Marcus's name was there. So was our Uncle James, even my father's golf partner, but not mine. A woman I recognized from marketing looked up from the next table and blinked. "Oh, hey, I thought you weren't coming. Your mom told everyone it was a closed family celebration." She said something about keeping the focus clear. She smiled awkwardly, like maybe that wasn't as cruel as it sounded. On the table sat a folded ivory card. I opened it. It read, "Congratulations to our son Marcus. With all our love, Mom and Dad." That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not snapped, not broke, just tilted. A man in an expensive suit passed by, glanced at me, and said, "You must be with the catering team. You're not wearing the family pin." I looked down at my badge. Guest. No name, no title. In my head, I heard myself say, "Not even a name tag, just a ghost badge." That's what I am to them now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. So I smiled, said nothing, picked up a glass of champagne from a tray, and started walking toward the back exit of the banquet hall. I didn't go straight home after the reception. I walked past restaurants buzzing with evening diners, past families laughing on the sidewalk, past a little girl holding a balloon that said, "Congratulations." It wasn't until the city lights came on that I finally hailed a cab and let it carry me back to my apartment downtown. I climbed the stairs slowly, kicked off my heels by the door, and stood still for a moment. The silence in my place was familiar, like a worn sweater I never had the heart to throw away. I tossed the dinner program on the kitchen counter, but it didn't land the way I expected. Its pages fluttered open, and my eyes landed on a photo from the ceremony. My parents with Marcus, all three smiling. The caption read, "Proud moment for the Reynolds family." No trace of me. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor. An old company newsletter spread across my lap. It was from Marcus's MBA graduation 5 years ago. My mom had told me not to bother showing up that day either. "It's not your moment," she'd said. The page with the family tribute caught my attention. One of those custom spreads in the company magazine. "To the son who carries our legacy forward. We are so proud of you, Marcus." A single photo. My parents and Marcus standing in the atrium of the Reynolds building. I remembered that photo. I'd been in it too. I'd stood right next to him, wearing a blazer Mom picked. I remember because she criticized me for wearing flats instead of heels. But in this version, I was gone, cropped out cleanly. I touched the edge of the page and stared until my vision blurred. They didn't forget me. They erased me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and a stiff neck. I had fallen asleep on the floor, curled up with that newsletter beside me like some kind of haunted diary. I pulled myself up and got ready for work. At the investment firm where I analyzed market trends, nobody mentioned what happened. Of course not. Why would they? The Reynolds had always maintained their image well, and I never talked about them. Not really. Around 10, while I was pouring my second cup of coffee, one of the junior analysts, Claire, wandered in and said casually, "Hey, I saw some pics on social last night. Your dad's retirement looked amazing. That speech about family legacy was something else." I turned, steadying my hand so I wouldn't spill the mug. "He always looks the part," I replied, then added with a small smile. "I was there, just in the shadows, like always." Claire didn't catch the edge in my voice. She laughed. "You're mysterious like that." Mysterious. That's one word for it. I headed back to my desk, past a colleague I knew had once partnered with my father on a development project. He nodded politely but didn't ask how I was. Another woman who used to intern at Reynolds Industries looked away as I passed, pretending to dig through her bag. They weren't being mean, just choosing not to see. I sat down, opened my inbox, and stared at the screen while my reflection hovered faintly in the glass. What kind of family invites you just to disown you publicly? That line echoed in my head like a song lyric I couldn't stop humming. Worse, what kind of daughter still shows up hoping it might be different? I hated how much I wanted them to change their minds. How badly I had clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they were still my family. I glanced over at the stack of papers in my drawer. Old birthday cards addressed, "To our children," company newsletters where my name was squeezed into a corner like a footnote. One year they sent a holiday card to clients that only featured Marcus's photo. They said it was a quote, planting choice. It was never one moment. It was thousands of moments. Small cuts I'd ignored until now. Because last night, when I picked up my bag and slipped out the back of the reception hall, I didn't leave empty-handed. I took the envelope, the ivory one with gold foil lettering, and the handwritten message inside, "To our son Marcus." I'd slid it into my purse without blinking, because ghosts don't knock things over. They just remove things without being noticed. And once I got home, I placed it in a lockbox under my bed, beside a growing collection of items they never intended me to keep. That night, I didn't cry. I got quiet, and then I started digging. The rain started just after midnight. Quiet at first, tapping softly against the living room window like someone too polite to knock. I sat there with a blanket draped over my shoulders and my laptop open in front of me, casting a pale blue light across the room. I hadn't moved in hours. I had decided to stop crying. And so I didn't. I clicked through folders I hadn't opened in years. There was still a shared cloud drive linked to my personal email, left over from when I used to manage digital archives for the family business. They'd never revoked access. I was the one who set it up. Typical of them, really. They like to erase people with words, not technology. I scanned through documents aimlessly at first. Old tax files, property deeds, board meeting notes. But then something flagged in my brain. A folder labeled Acquisitions Private, and inside it, a PDF file. Phoenix Group, Transfer of Ownership, Final. I clicked, and there it was. My name, my full legal name, typed above a signature that looked almost like mine, but not quite. The O was too round, the loop on the Y too straight. It was a bad copy, and it had been notarized. I stared at the name of the notary public in the margin. Edward Reynolds, my cousin, of course. I grabbed a file from my drawer, an old lease agreement with my real signature on it, and compared the two side by side. No match, not even close. It hit me then. What they'd done wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. They didn't just cut me out of a speech. They forged my signature to strip me of ownership on the only thing Dad ever gave me in his will. A stake in Phoenix Group, a small but profitable subsidiary I helped rebuild during my brief time at Reynolds Industries. The company I'd salvaged when no one else believed in it, where I'd replaced the management team, restructured the debt, and turned it from a liability into an asset. The place where I'd proven myself. I closed the laptop slowly, like sealing a coffin. I couldn't sleep after that. Around 3, I picked up the phone and called the only person in my family who ever treated me like I had a voice. Aunt Maggie. There was a pause, then her familiar husky voice. "Olivia, honey? Are you okay?" "Not really." My voice cracked on the words. "I found a Phoenix Group transfer with my name, but it's not my signature." Another long silence. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered. "You saw it, didn't you?" "You knew?" I asked. "I didn't know what to do," she confessed. "Your mother told me it was just paperwork, that they were cleaning up the books for the transition. I thought maybe it was a mistake or something they'd tell you about later." I leaned against the kitchen wall, sliding down to the floor. "You knew they were moving my name off the ownership documents." "I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding or something they'd fix," she said. "I'm sorry. I should have said something." Her voice wavered, old guilt surfacing. "You know how your mother gets. And your father, he just follows." That sentence lingered in the air like smoke. "You know how your mother gets. Like she was a storm you couldn't stop, only brace for. I'm tired of making excuses for them, Aunt Maggie." "I know, baby." Her voice cracked again. "I know." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing, just listening to the rain. By dawn, the edges of my resolve had hardened. I brewed coffee and sat at my dining table with legal pads, highlighters, and the old laptop I hadn't touched in months. This wasn't just about Phoenix Group. It wasn't about being cropped out of a picture. It was the pattern. The way every time something mattered, something real, they found a way to uninvite me. From the company newsletter, from family holidays, from the business I helped rebuild. But now they were going to remember exactly who I was. Not because I'd ask for space at their table again, but because I'd be the one flipping the table over. By mid-morning, the clouds outside had started to thin, but the heaviness in my chest only deepened. I hadn't slept, just worked through the night, cross-referencing, checking ownership documents, combing through financial databases like a woman possessed. A soft hum from my coffee maker filled the silence as I stared at the screen, my coffee cold beside me. There it was. Burlington, Vermont. Asset Idaho 7721309. The manufacturing facility. The one with the 300 employees and the distinctive red brick facade. The one my grandfather built from nothing. Status: transferred. New owner, Artemis Holdings LLC. I clicked the name. Artemis Holdings didn't even try to hide it. The registered agent was a corporate attorney based in Chicago, the same one Marcus had posted about on LinkedIn 8 weeks ago. They didn't just transfer Phoenix Group. They were dismantling the core assets of Reynolds Industries piece by piece, reconfiguring ownership through a maze of holding companies. There wasn't a press release, no company-wide email, no board meeting announcement, just a silent, surgical reorganization, like I wasn't a stakeholder at all. Like I hadn't spent years attending those manufacturing facility inspections, listening to employee concerns, recommending the modernization plan that saved them from closure. But now it was funding Marcus's new venture capital firm. The slogan on his website even said, "Legacy-minded investing inspired by family values." My grandfather would have been horrified. I closed the browser. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was violation. That's the word. This wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper, colder. I needed air. I threw on a coat and walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks away, hoping the rhythm of motion would slow my thoughts. I wasn't there for caffeine, just to think without looking at a glowing screen. But fate had other plans. Just as I turned the corner by the self-service counter, I heard her voice. "Olivia?" I turned. Mrs. Patterson, an old friend of my mother's known for fundraisers and passive aggression, was holding a pastry bag in manicured fingers. She smiled like she didn't know her teeth were knives. "Darling, I heard Marcus is doing so well. Your mother says he's launching an exciting new investment firm. Isn't that just wonderful?" I forced a polite nod. "Yeah, funny. I thought that manufacturing facility was still part of Reynolds Industries." The shift in her expression was microscopic. A flicker of recognition, the kind people get when they realize they've said too much. "Oh, I mean, I don't know all the details. You know how family businesses are, always restructuring things without telling the children?" I held her gaze, eyes steady. "Do I?" She didn't answer, just smiled again. That same smile I'd seen at every charity gala. The one that said, "Don't make a scene, sweetheart." I left the coffee shop without another word. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed with a text from an old business school classmate who had no idea what was going on. "Heard your family's reorganizing Reynolds Industries assets. Marcus is making waves. Jealous of his new venture right now." Jealous. That word sat on my tongue like vinegar. People envied him because they didn't know the cost of his shine. The silence of everyone he'd stepped over to get it. This wasn't just about business. It was abandonment in 1,000 quiet, well-dressed ways. It was family photos where you've been photoshopped out. It was a legacy where your name doesn't echo anywhere. So I did the only thing that made sense. I changed clothes, printed the ownership documents, and packed my bag. Because some answers aren't found online. Some are behind frosted office doors and receptionist smiles. And I knew exactly where to start. I parked across the street from the Reynolds Industries headquarters and stared at the glass tower that reflected the morning sun like a beacon. The last time I stood here, I was 22 and holding a printed version of my market analysis. Dad told me to come in quietly, not to overshadow Marcus's first day in the executive program. I remembered the suit I wore, navy blue, slightly tight in the shoulders because I'd bought it off the rack. He said if I stayed in the background and didn't challenge anyone, maybe they'd consider me for the junior analyst position. I stayed quiet, I didn't challenge. They gave the position to Marcus's roommate from business school instead. Now, almost 8 years later, I wasn't here to impress anyone. I walked in without calling ahead. The front desk receptionist, maybe an intern, gave me a polite but hesitant smile, the kind you reserve for people who might cause a scene. She asked if I had an appointment. I didn't bother answering. My heels tapped steadily down the marble hallway I knew by heart. Diana Reynolds didn't flinch when I entered her office. She looked up from her screen, not surprised at all. "Olivia," she said smoothly, like we'd just had brunch the day before. "I'd like a few minutes." She motioned to the leather chair across from her desk. I stayed standing. Her office hadn't changed. Same white orchids, same framed awards, same magazine covers with her perfect smile, all precisely arranged. I half expected her to straighten the frames before we spoke. "I regret that you felt hurt," she began, hands folded. "But we did what was best for the company's image." There it was, the apology that wasn't. "You didn't regret the decision," I replied, my voice steady. "You regret how it looked." She exhaled gently through her nose, as if I were being dramatic. "You're still welcome at events, just as a guest, not as a face of the Reynolds legacy. I hope you understand. It's about cohesion, simplicity." I tilted my head. "You mean control." Her lips twitched. "We can't have every branch growing in a different direction. People notice." "I hope they do," I said. "Because I'm not bending back into shape just to fit your narrative." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I already knew where she stood. Always behind Marcus in front of a camera, beside Dad when it made sense. That evening, I attended the investors' dinner I'd RSVP'd 2 months ago, before the disowning, before the erasure, when I still believed I had a seat in their world. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but the name tag clipped to my jacket said, "O. Reynolds." Not Reynolds family, not director, just a name with an initial. The ballroom buzzed with investors and well-dressed executives. I kept to the edges, scanning faces. I didn't expect warmth, but I wasn't prepared for how invisible I'd become. Small talk floated past me like perfume. Midway through dinner, a waiter handed out champagne. My father raised his glass. "To my son Marcus, whose vision continues to guide this company forward into its next chapter." I froze. A few heads turned toward me, then quickly looked away. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass. Even Marcus blinked, clearly unsettled, but he didn't correct him. He just smiled and clinked his glass with the nearest investor. It didn't matter if he agreed. Silence served him just as well. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't speak. But something cracked deep inside. Clean and final. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exile, polished and gift-wrapped. I left quietly before dessert. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. I walked 2 blocks before calling a rideshare. As I sat in the back seat, the city lights blurred past. I replayed every word, every look, my mother's gentle scolding, my father's toast, the way Marcus stood just close enough to be admired, just far enough to stay clean. And I knew I wasn't going to wait for an apology or an explanation. They'd made their legacy without me. Now it was my turn. I didn't waste time sleeping in. As soon as the sun broke through the slats in my blinds, I was already at my kitchen island. My laptop screen flickered with legal documents, financial ledgers, and a half-empty coffee cup sweating onto a coaster. Everything I needed was here. Not emotionally, but legally. I had spent the night reviewing contracts I was never meant to see, thanks to a shared cloud folder they forgot to revoke my access from. I cross-referenced email threads, matched signatures, pulled metadata off PDFs. The trail wasn't obvious, but it was there. A complex web of transactions that quietly circumvented standard approval processes. A restructuring memo listing the company's future with only Marcus's name and vision. And most importantly, a fatal oversight in their plan. 3 years ago, when Phoenix Group was struggling, I had suggested a unique financing structure to save it. My father dismissed it publicly, but apparently implemented it privately, with one critical difference. While they thought they were transferring Phoenix Group to Artemis Holdings, they had actually, through a series of technical errors in the documentation, transferred it to a shell company that I controlled. It was a mistake born of arrogance. They were so focused on appearances, on making sure Marcus looked like the savior, that they hadn't bothered to verify the details. My name was on the actual ownership documents, buried under layers of corporate structure but legally binding. I slid the printed files into a leather portfolio, dark burgundy with silver trim. My father had once given it to me when I was 16, filled with company history and sealed with a note, "Learn from the past but don't repeat it." Now it would carry my first real reply. By 10, I was standing outside the office of the family's longtime attorney, William Bell. The last time I saw him was at my grandfather's funeral. He greeted me like someone unsure whether to hug or call security. "I need 10 minutes," I said flatly. William took the portfolio carefully. I could see him scanning the label. Typed, not handwritten. Before glancing up, "I'll have to review this. There's a certified ownership verification, a trust challenge, and a digital link with documentation of the legitimate transfer. The instructions are inside." "I assume this comes with expectations," he asked. "No," I said. "It comes with consequences." I didn't wait for him to respond. Back in the elevator, my reflection stared back at me in the chrome. I looked like someone who hadn't slept, but I felt more awake than I had in years. The financial records had taken months to piece together. Quiet, patient analysis of board decisions, asset transfers, restructuring plans. They never thought I'd still be watching. They assumed they'd worn me down, erased me by attrition. One email thread played in my head again, clear as day. "Mom, in a strategy meeting pre-brief, we only use Marcus's proposals. Olivia's analysis doesn't fit the direction we're selling." Then Dad chuckling. "She used to read everything." Well, I still did. Back at home, I finally sat down. Not at the table. On the floor. I stared at the old family photo, still framed near my bookshelf. It was from before Marcus's graduation, before the edits. I'd kept it knowing they'd someday pretend it didn't exist. It felt strange to not feel rage. Not in this moment. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I'd made my move. I didn't send the portfolio with malice. I sent it like you send a receipt. Just proof of transaction. Proof that I existed, that I saw what they did, that I knew. I called my financial advisor that night. "I don't want revenge," I told her. "But I won't let them use my silence as consent. If they're going to erase me, I want the record to show who held the pen." She was quiet for a beat, then said, "Then it starts now." The next morning, I opened my laptop to check my email, just out of habit. But before I even had the chance, my phone was already buzzing. I hadn't even made coffee yet when the messages started coming in. 5 missed calls. 2 from blocked numbers, 1 from a business reporter at the Wall Street Journal. I ignored them all. Instead, I tapped the screen and opened my browser. Front page. There it was, plastered across the homepage of a financial news site. Reynolds Industries ownership in question. Anonymous sources reveal corporate shell game. My throat clenched before I even read the subheader. It was real. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It referenced board documents, internal memos, and direct quotes from emails I knew intimately, because I had collected them, reviewed them, lived with them. The public didn't know it was me who found them, but Reynolds Industries certainly would. They'd always bragged about being in control of their own narrative. Now the story had slipped through their fingers. And for once, I wasn't the one left out. The story moved fast. By lunch, investors were making quiet exits. 2 quarterly earnings calls were postponed indefinitely. Comments flooded in. Nepotism at its finest. Where did the money really go? This is what happens when you prioritize image over substance. And still, I hadn't said a word. I scrolled down to a section titled, "Stakeholders Silenced," and saw a screenshot of an email chain from 2 years ago. My name wasn't in the message, but it referenced the younger Reynolds and her unnecessary complications when reviewing acquisition strategies. I could practically hear my mother's tone between the lines. And then came the kicker. Someone had leaked the audio. It wasn't the full library of recordings I had submitted to our lawyer. Just one. The one where Diana, in a room full of board members, said, We only use Marcus's face in marketing. The other one doesn't photograph well with our corporate vision. Followed by my father's voice. We need to be careful what Olivia finds. She used to read everything. The internet did what it always does. It dissected every syllable. And for once, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. That afternoon, I left the apartment to clear my head. At the corner deli, the cashier gave me a polite smile but didn't say anything. On my walk home, I passed a bus stop where someone was scrolling through the article on their phone. I didn't linger. When I got back, there was an email waiting from a PR firm, one I recognized from the Reynolds Industries press kits. We're preparing a unifying statement and would love to include a quote from you, Olivia. Your voice matters. No subject line, no personal greeting, just an empty attempt to rope me back in for optics. I didn't reply. That night, while half the family scrambled for damage control, Diana announced a family unity dinner at her favorite restaurant in Tribeca. From what I gathered, 2 board members showed up out of obligation. Marcus never arrived. I could almost hear my mother's voice cracking under forced grace. We're focusing on healing and moving forward. Translation: we're losing control and need to patch the boat before it sinks. But it was too late. Investors were asking questions about Phoenix Group, about the trust, about the forged signature. They weren't angry, they were done. At 10 pages M, I refreshed the news site again. A new photo had been added to the article. My mother, exiting the Reynolds building in her tailored blazer. But her lapel pin, the gold company logo she always wore, was missing. That tiny gleaming symbol I once would have given anything to earn. Now I sat alone in my apartment, cross-legged on the couch, laptop on my knees. The shadows were long, the air was still, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I didn't have her pin. I had something better. The truth. My phone rang at 7 a.m. The caller ID showed William Bell. I answered on the 3rd ring. Olivia, he said, his voice unusually careful. The partners would like to meet with you today. It's important. 3 hours later, I walked into the conference room at Bell & Associates. Not the main one with the view of the park. The smaller one, tucked away on the 7th floor, where they handled sensitive matters. William stood when I entered. But he wasn't alone. Robert Chen, the firm's managing partner, and Eliza Davidson, their corporate governance specialist, flanked him like sentinels. Thank you for coming, William began, gesturing to a chair. I sat, placing my bag beside me. I hadn't brought files or notes. I didn't need them. We've reviewed the documentation you provided, Robert said, his voice measured, and we've been in contact with the Reynolds family. I waited, saying nothing. The situation is, Eliza paused, choosing her words, unprecedented. Is it? I asked. Or is it just inconvenient? The room tensed. William cleared his throat. Your ownership claim to Phoenix Group is valid, he said flatly. The documentation is in order. The transfer to Artemis Holdings was improperly executed, and the interim holding company does, in fact, list you as the primary stakeholder. I nodded once. This wasn't news to me. However, Robert continued, the Reynolds family disputes the interpretation. They believe there was a clerical error. There was, I said. They made it. Eliza leaned forward. Olivia, this could become extremely contentious. Are you prepared for what might follow? Legal battles, public scrutiny, family estrangement. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. I was publicly disowned at my father's retirement dinner. I've been erased from company photos for years. Estrangement isn't a threat. It's already my reality. The 3 exchanged glances. What do you want? William asked directly. What did I want? Such a simple question with such a complicated answer. I want what's legally mine, I said. And I want recognition of what was done. Recognition? Robert repeated. Acknowledgement. Not just of the ownership issue, but of the pattern. The systematic erasure. William nodded slowly. I see. Do you? I asked. Because for years, no one has. The meeting ended with no resolution, just a promise to continue discussions. As I stood to leave, William walked me to the elevator. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "your grandfather would have been proud. He valued integrity above all else." I didn't respond, just stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close between us. That night, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. Same response. Marcus, though, he texted, "We need to talk, not as Reynolds, just as us." I stared at those words for a long time before replying, "Tomorrow." Neutral ground. We met at a small cafe in Chelsea, far from the corporate crowds and society circles our parents frequented. Marcus arrived first. I could see him through the window, fidgeting with a paper napkin, looking more like the brother I grew up with than the executive he'd become. When I sat down across from him, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. "About what?" I asked. "The forged signature? The transfer? Or the way our parents built a legacy on making me disappear?" He flinched. "I didn't know about the signature. But you knew about the rest." He looked down. "Not all of it. Not at first." "When?" I pressed. "When did you become complicit?" Quote, "Complicit," he repeated, testing the word. "Is that what you think? What would you call it?" He was silent for a moment. "Survival, maybe, then habit." I leaned back, studying him. The tailored suit couldn't hide the shadows under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. "They're in panic mode," he said finally. "The board is calling emergency meetings. Investors are pulling out. Dad's retirement fund is tanking with the stock price." "And they sent you to fix it?" "No," he said, meeting my eyes. "They don't know I'm here." Something in his voice made me pause. "Why are you here, Marcus?" He took a deep breath. "Because I'm tired. Because watching you walk out of that dinner made me realize I've been playing a part for so long I've forgotten who I really am. Because maybe it's time for both of us to stop disappearing for their comfort." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not asking you to give anything up," he continued. "What you have, you earned. But I am asking for a chance to make this right. Not for them, for us." "What does right look like to you?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know it starts with the truth, all of it. In the open." I considered his words, trying to see beyond years of trained suspicion. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said. "They're planning to announce a restructuring, blame it on market conditions, and hope the storm passes. But it won't work if we both show up with what we know." "Both," I repeated. "I have my own files," he said quietly. "Things I've kept. Things they made me do. I'm not innocent in this, Olivia, but I'm not the villain they've cast me as either." For the first time in years, I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw someone as trapped as I had been, just in a gilded cage rather than exile. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "A unified front," he said, "not as Reynolds' heirs, but as two people who deserve the truth. We walk into that boardroom together, we lay it all out, and then we decide what happens next. Not them." I sipped my coffee, buying time to think. "Why should I trust you now?" His smile was sad. "You shouldn't. Not yet. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it back." As I walked home, the city seemed different somehow. Not brighter or darker, just clearer. Marcus's words echoed in my head, competing with years of trained distrust. Could I believe him? Did it matter? What mattered was what happened next, the story I chose to write from here. I spent that night organizing files, preparing statements, rehearsing words I'd held back for years. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The Reynolds Industries boardroom had always intimidated me. 40 stories up, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel simultaneously powerful and exposed. I'd sat in the observer chairs before, never at the table. Today would be different. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal suit that meant business, not peace. The executive assistant did a double-take when I walked in, but didn't stop me. Word had spread. I chose a seat at the middle of the table and waited. Board members filtered in, nodding awkwardly or avoiding eye contact altogether. Then Marcus arrived, carrying a similar portfolio to mine. He sat beside me without a word, but the slight nod he gave me said everything. My parents entered last. Diana froze momentarily when she saw us, then composed herself and took her usual seat at the head of the table. Richard looked pale, older somehow, as he sat beside her. "Let's begin," Diana said, her voice steady but thin. "As you know, we're facing some public relations challenges." "Is that what we're calling it?" I interrupted. The room went silent. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Olivia, this is a private board meeting. You're welcome to observe, but—" "Actually," I said, opening my portfolio, "as the legal owner of Phoenix Group, which represents 23% of Reynolds Industries' portfolio, I have every right to speak. I placed the ownership documents on the table. These were verified by your own attorneys yesterday." Richard leaned forward. There was a clerical error. "Yes," I agreed. "Several, in fact. Like the forged signature on the transfer documents. Like the notarization by a family member. Like the systematic removal of my name from company records while keeping my contributions." Marcus cleared his throat. "And the misrepresentation to investors about the true ownership structure of our subsidiaries." Diana's head snapped toward him. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done years ago," he replied. "Telling the truth," I continued, my voice steady. "For years you've built a narrative that erased me. You took my ideas, my work, my rightful place, and you distributed them to others. You created a legacy on the foundation of making me disappear." I looked around the table at the board members, some who had known me since childhood. "But here's what you missed. I never stopped watching. I never stopped learning, and I never surrendered my voice. I just waited for the right moment to use it." I stood, placing both hands on the table. "I own Phoenix Group. Legally, legitimately, irrevocably. But that's not why I'm here today." I turned to face my parents directly. "I'm here because you invited me to a dinner, just to disown me publicly. Because you thought I would stay silent, stay erased. But what you never understood is that I don't need your name, your approval, or your legacy." My voice never wavered. I built my own. The room went absolutely silent. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. For 5 long seconds, no one moved. No rustling papers, no cleared throats, just the gentle hum of the air conditioning and 20 pairs of eyes fixed either on me or studiously avoiding contact altogether. Diana's fingers twitched first, reaching for a pen only to withdraw. Her composure, that carefully cultivated mask of control, cracked along invisible fault lines. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in her designer suit. "This is absurd," she finally said, but the conviction in her voice rang hollow. "We can discuss ownership irregularities privately, as a family." "As a family?" I repeated, the words sharp but controlled. "You publicly disowned me 3 days ago. You don't get to invoke family values when they're convenient." One of the board members, Joanna Miller, who'd known me since I was 12, leaned forward. "I believe we need clarity before proceeding. Ms. Reynolds, you're claiming legitimate ownership of Phoenix Group?" "I'm not claiming anything," I replied. "I'm stating a legal fact, verified by the company's own counsel. Phoenix Group has been under my ownership for 7 months, ever since the improper transfer attempt." Richard's face flushed red. "This is a technical oversight that can be remedied." "Like removing my name from company archives was an oversight?" I asked. "Like forging my signature was an oversight? Like announcing to a room full of colleagues that I no longer existed was an oversight?" Marcus placed a document on the table, sliding it toward the center. "The oversight wasn't accidental. These are emails outlining the deliberate restructuring of Phoenix Group's ownership, including instructions to remove Olivia from all decision-making processes while maintaining the appearance of proper protocol." Diana stared at him with undisguised shock. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "The right thing," he said simply. "Finally." The CFO cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to—" "No," I said firmly. "I didn't come here to be dismissed again. I came here with a proposal." I reached into my portfolio and retrieved a bound document, placing it before each board member. This is a comprehensive restructuring plan for Reynolds Industries. It addresses the governance issues, the misleading investor communications, and the improper asset transfers. They stared at the folders, none daring to open them yet. Reynolds Industries has a reputation problem, I continued. But more importantly, it has an integrity problem. And both can be solved the same way, with transparency. I nodded to Marcus, who stood and took his place beside me. My brother and I are proposing a complete corporate reorganization. Phoenix Group returns to Reynolds Industries' portfolio, but with a transparent ownership structure and a new board of directors. Marcus picked up the thread. We're recommending an independent audit of all company assets and transfers from the past 5 years, with results to be shared with all major stakeholders. Diana's mouth opened and closed, words failing her for perhaps the first time in her life. Richard just stared, face ashen. You would destroy everything your grandfather built, he finally said, his voice thin with disbelief. No, I corrected him. I'm saving what he actually built, a company founded on innovation and integrity, not image and illusion. The board chair, Dr. Eleanor Thompson, a formidable woman who'd served through 2 generations of Reynolds leadership, adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. This is unprecedented, she said, choosing her words with care. But not without merit. Quote, she opened her folder, scanning the first page. You've clearly put considerable thought into this proposal. I've had years to think about it, I replied, my voice steady. And what happens if we decline? Asked Thomas Wilkins, the longest-serving board member and my father's closest ally. I met his gaze directly. Then tomorrow morning I exercise my rights as owner of Phoenix Group. I pull it entirely from Reynolds Industries' portfolio, taking its contracts, clients, and contributions with it. I also release all documentation of the attempted fraud to the SEC and major shareholders. The threat hung in the air, not as revenge, but as simple consequence. Diana stood abruptly. I need to consult with our attorneys. They've already seen this, Marcus said quietly. William Bell reviewed it yesterday. She turned to him, betrayal etched on her face. You went behind my back? I learned from the best, he replied, not unkindly. For the first time, I saw something flash across my mother's face that I'd never witnessed before. Uncertainty. Diana Reynolds, the woman who orchestrated every family photo down to the angle of our smiles, who controlled every narrative with surgical precision, looked genuinely lost. Dr. Thompson closed her folder decisively. I believe the board should discuss this proposal in detail. Richard, Diana, given the nature of these allegations and your personal involvement, I must ask you to recuse yourselves from this portion of the meeting. Richard stood, face flushed with indignation. This is still my company. Actually, Dr. Thompson replied coolly, it belongs to the shareholders, and it's our duty to act in their best interest. She nodded to the corporate secretary. Please note in the minutes that an emergency executive session has been called. My parents had no choice. With rigid backs and carefully controlled expressions, they walked out of the boardroom, neither looking at me or Marcus as they passed. When the door closed behind them, Dr. Thompson turned to us. Now let's discuss this properly. The next 3 hours were a blur of questions, clarifications, and careful negotiations. Board members who had barely acknowledged my existence at company functions now listened intently as I outlined inconsistencies in financial reporting. Legal counsel confirmed the validity of my ownership claims. The independent directors asked pointed questions about Marcus's involvement and knowledge. Throughout it all, my brother and I presented a united front, not out of family loyalty that had been shattered long ago, but out of shared commitment to truth. By afternoon, the emergency session had reached its conclusion. My parents were invited back into the room, both looking as though they'd aged years and hours. Dr. Thompson addressed them formally. The board has reached a decision. We will be implementing the restructuring plan as proposed, with some modifications. She glanced at the corporate secretary. Details will be reflected in the minutes. Richard slumped in his chair. Diana remained rigidly upright, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above everyone's heads. Furthermore, Dr. Thompson continued, in light of the evidence presented today, The board requests your immediate resignations from your operational roles, while maintaining your board seats as major shareholders. The room held its collective breath. Diana spoke first, her voice remarkably composed. You're asking us to step down from the company we built. The company we all built, I corrected quietly. Every employee, every investor, every person whose contribution was minimized or erased. Dr. Thompson nodded. This isn't punitive, Diana. It's necessary. The allegations of document falsification alone would trigger regulatory scrutiny. We're offering a path forward that protects the company while addressing the governance failures. My father looked utterly defeated. My mother looked dangerous. And who, she asked with deadly precision, do you propose should lead during this transition? Dr. Thompson didn't hesitate. The board recommends Olivia Reynolds as interim CEO, with Marcus Reynolds as Chief Strategy Officer. Their intimate knowledge of the situation makes them uniquely qualified to navigate these challenges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The daughter they had erased would now be the face of their legacy. The son they had groomed would support rather than lead. Diana stood. I need time to consider this proposal. Of course, Dr. Thompson replied. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow. After that, we move forward with or without your cooperation. My mother's gaze finally found mine. For the first time since childhood, she actually saw me, not as an inconvenience or an imperfection in the family portrait, but as a force to be reckoned with. Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite respect, but recognition. Without another word, she left the room. My father followed, shoulders bent under an invisible weight. As the boardroom emptied, Marcus and I remained seated, neither quite believing what had just transpired. That went differently than I expected, he said finally. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. What did you expect? More shouting, maybe some tears. Definitely more threats. The day's not over yet, I replied, gathering my papers. As we walked to the elevator, Marcus hesitated. Olivia, I know this doesn't fix anything between us. I know I stood by while they… Not now, I said, not unkindly. Today was about business. The personal stuff, that's a longer conversation. He nodded, understanding. Where are you going now? I checked my watch. To prepare for tomorrow. 9 a.m. comes early. And we both know Diana Reynolds doesn't surrender without a fight. I was right. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was exploding with notifications. Distant family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had urgent messages for me. College friends with tenuous connections to Reynolds Industries wanted inside information. And 3 separate crisis management firms had somehow obtained my contact information. I ignored them all and poured myself a glass of wine. My apartment felt different somehow. The same furniture, the same walls, but the air had changed. For years, this place had been my refuge, the one space where I could exist without being erased or diminished. Now it felt like a launching pad rather than a hiding place. I moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. Somewhere out there, my parents were strategizing, calculating, trying to salvage control. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't care what they were planning. I was no longer reacting to their narrative. I was writing my own. My phone rang again. William Bell. Olivia, he said when I answered. I thought you should know that your mother has called an emergency family meeting at the house tonight. I'm not family, remember? I replied, taking a sip of wine. They made that abundantly clear. Nevertheless, she specifically requested your presence. 8 o'clock. I considered declining. After all, what could possibly be said that would change anything now? I'll think about it, I told him, and hung up. For an hour I paced my apartment, weighing options, rehearsing responses. The rational choice was to maintain distance, to communicate only through official channels with witnesses present. But something pulled at me, not hope for reconciliation, but perhaps closure. At 7:45, I found myself in a car headed toward the family home in Westchester, a sprawling colonial where every room had been featured in design magazines, and every family moment had been carefully curated. The housekeeper who answered the door looked surprised to see me but led me silently to the formal living room, where voices were already raised. I paused in the doorway, taking in the tableau. My parents stood on opposite sides of the room, my father by the fireplace, my mother by the windows. Marcus sat on the edge of an armchair, looking uncomfortable. Aunt Rebecca, my mother's sister and staunch defender, perched on the sofa. Uncle James, my father's brother and company board member, stood awkwardly near a sideboard laden with untouched drinks. Conversation stopped when I entered. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. "Olivia," my mother said, as if my appearance was unexpected, despite her invitation. "You came." "You asked me to," I replied simply, remaining by the door. "What is this about?" Diana straightened her already perfect posture. "This is about family, about legacy, about finding a path forward that preserves what we've built." "That ship has sailed," I said. "The board has made its decision. Boards can reconsider," she countered, "especially when presented with a united family front." I almost laughed. Is that what this is? A last-minute attempt to present a united front? "Don't be difficult, Olivia," Aunt Rebecca sighed. "Your mother is trying to salvage a very uncomfortable situation." "A situation she created," I pointed out. "Several situations, actually, over many years." Uncle James cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could focus on solutions rather than blame." "Fine," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "What solution are you proposing?" Quote, my mother moved to the center of the room, command position. "A compromise. You and Marcus withdraw the more extreme elements of your proposal. No public disclosure, no independent audit. You return Phoenix Group to the main corporate structure. In exchange, you both receive appropriate recognition and advancement." "Appropriate," I repeated. "And who determines what's appropriate? The same people who decided I should be erased from company history?" "That's unfair," my father interjected. "Is it?" I challenged. "Was it fair to forge my signature? Was it fair to disown me publicly? Was it fair to pretend I didn't exist whenever it was convenient for your image?" Silence descended, heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus spoke up. "Mom, Dad, what Olivia and I proposed isn't extreme. It's necessary. The company can't continue as it has been." My mother's eyes flashed. "So you would rather destroy your father's legacy than protect it?" "This isn't about Dad's legacy," I said. "It's about control. It always has been." Diana turned to me, abandoning pretense. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? The scrutiny this will bring? The damage to our reputation? To our standing in the community?" "I'm doing exactly what you taught me," I replied calmly. "I'm controlling the narrative. I'm just not using your script." My father sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "Why now? After all this time, why take this nuclear option now?" The question hung in the air, seemingly genuine. "Because you left me no choice," I answered truthfully. "You could have erased me quietly, relegated me to a footnote in the family story. But you chose to make it public. You chose to stand up at that dinner and declare to everyone that I didn't belong. You made your rejection a spectacle. I stepped fully into the room now, claiming my space. So yes, this is happening now because you decided that erasing me privately wasn't enough. You needed witnesses. Well, now you have them, just not the ones you wanted." My mother's jaw tightened. "We did what was necessary for the company's image." "No," I countered. "You did what was easy. What was necessary would have been acknowledging my contributions. What was necessary would have been honesty with your investors about corporate structure. What was necessary would have been treating your daughter like a person, not a PR problem." Aunt Rebecca stood, always the loyal sister. "Diana has only ever wanted what's best for this family." "This isn't a family," I said quietly. "It's a brand. And I'm done being photoshopped out of the picture." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the antique clock ticking on the mantel, marking seconds that felt like hours. Then my mother did something unexpected. She sat down, the fight visibly draining from her. Not surrendering exactly, but reassessing. "What do you want, Olivia?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically direct. "Really want, beyond the corporate restructuring?" I hadn't expected this question, hadn't prepared for it. What did I want? Revenge? Recognition? Restitution? "I want acknowledgement," I said finally. "Not just of what I own, or what I've done, but of what was taken from me. Years of being diminished, years of watching my work attributed to others, years of being treated like an unfortunate draft that needed constant editing." I looked at each family member in turn, landing finally on my father. "I want you to sit with the knowledge that you sacrificed your daughter for your image, and now that daughter controls your legacy." My father couldn't hold my gaze. My mother didn't try to. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice hollow. "No," I replied. "I also want to rebuild Reynolds Industries into what it should have been all along. A company built on substance, not appearance. A place where contribution matters more than connection, where truth isn't something to be managed, but valued." Marcus stood and moved to stand beside me, not touching, not intervening, just visibly aligning himself. "That starts tomorrow," he said, "with or without your blessing." Diana looked at us both, her children standing together against the narrative she'd crafted for decades. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not acceptance, but perhaps a grudging respect. "9 a.m., she said finally. "We'll be there." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. As Marcus and I left the house, walking down the curved driveway where we'd once ridden bikes under watchful eyes, he turned to me. "They might never change, you know." "Not really." "I know," I replied, "but we have." The night air felt clean, fresh with possibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Press releases, stakeholder calls, employee meetings. The hard work of rebuilding a company whose foundation had cracked under the weight of appearance over substance. But tonight, walking away from the house that had never really been a home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Not from obligation or responsibility, but from expectation. From the exhausting work of trying to be seen by people determined not to see me. I'd spent years hoping for a place at their table. Now I was building my own. Morning arrived with the soft persistence of reality. I dressed carefully, a charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back neatly. Not trying to impress, just ready for business. The Reynolds Industries lobby buzzed with unusual energy as I walked through. Employees whispered behind cupped hands. Security guards nodded with new deference. And the executive floor receptionist stood as I approached. "Ms. Reynolds," she said with none of yesterday's hesitation, "the board is assembled in conference room A." I nodded my thanks and continued down the hallway, Marcus falling into step beside me. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," I replied. We pushed through the heavy double doors together. The boardroom looked different in morning light, less intimidating, more practical. Board members sat in their usual places. Legal counsel lined one wall, and my parents occupied their seats at the head of the table. Diana wore a navy suit, armor-like in its precision. Richard looked as though he hadn't slept. Dr. Thompson stood as we entered. "Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds, thank you for joining us. We're ready to begin." I took my seat, not at the end of the table, not in an observer's chair, but directly across from my parents. Marcus sat beside me. "Before we proceed with the agenda," Dr. Thompson continued, "I believe Richard Reynolds has a statement." My father cleared his throat, unfolding a piece of paper that trembled slightly in his hands. "After careful consideration," he began, his voice rough with emotion or exhaustion, "Diana and I have decided to accept the board's recommendation. We will be stepping down from our operational roles, effective immediately." A murmur ran through the room, quickly silenced as he continued. "We also support the board's decision to appoint Olivia as interim CEO and Marcus as Chief Strategy Officer." Their knowledge and perspective will be valuable during this transition." He paused, seemingly struggling with the next part. "Furthermore, we acknowledge that certain decisions regarding company structure and family matters have been handled improperly. For that, we take full responsibility." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even close. But it was admission, and from Richard Reynolds, that was monumental. Diana said nothing, her face an unreadable mask. Dr. Thompson nodded. "Thank you, Richard. The board appreciates your cooperation." She turned to me. "Olivia, as interim CEO, would you like to address the room?" I hadn't prepared remarks. I didn't need to. I stood, feeling the weight of every gaze, the echo of every dismissal, the shadow of every erasure that had led to this moment. "Reynolds Industries stands at a crossroads," I began, "not just of leadership, but of identity. For too long, we've prioritized perception over substance, image over integrity. Today, that changes." I looked directly at my parents as I continued. "We will undergo a comprehensive audit and restructuring. We will communicate transparently with our stakeholders. We will value contribution over connection. And we will build a company where no one's voice is silenced, no one's work is erased, and no one's worth is determined by their place in a family photo." The board members nodded, some with enthusiasm, others with resignation. "This won't be easy," I acknowledged. "Change rarely is. But it is necessary, not just for our bottom line, but for our collective integrity." I turned to Marcus, who nodded his support. "My brother and I stand ready to lead this transition, not as heirs to a family business, but as professionals committed to its transformation. We ask for your trust, your patience, and your honesty as we move forward." As I returned to my seat, I caught my mother's eye. No warmth passed between us, no forgiveness or reconciliation, but there was recognition of my presence, my power, my place at the table I'd earned rather than inherited. The meeting proceeded with formal matters: signatures, transitional arrangements, press statements. My parents participated minimally, saying only what was required. When it concluded, they left without private words or meaningful glances. Not angry, not defeated, just removed. As if they'd already begun the process of editing this chapter from their personal narrative. I didn't need their acknowledgement anymore. I had something far more valuable. My own voice, finally heard. As the boardroom emptied, Marcus touched my arm lightly. "CEO Reynolds," he said with the hint of a smile, "has a certain ring to it." "Interim CEO," I corrected. "For now," he replied. "But we both know temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you prove yourself indispensable." I gathered my papers, suddenly aware of the weight of the challenge ahead. "We have a lot of work to do." "We do," he agreed. "But for the first time, we're doing it together, on our terms." As we walked toward what was now my office, a corner suite with views of the city my father had claimed for decades, my phone buzzed with a message from William Bell. "Congratulations. Your grandfather would be proud." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. This wasn't about making anyone proud. Not my grandfather, not my parents, not even myself. It was about correction. About restoration. About truth finally breaking through the carefully maintained facade. I paused at the threshold of the CEO's office, taking in the space that had been the heart of Reynolds' power for as long as I could remember. The heavy desk, the wall of awards, the family photos, carefully curated to tell the story Diana had wanted told. The first thing I would change, I decided, wasn't the furniture or the art, or even the nameplate on the door. It was the narrative itself. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of change. The corporate headquarters no longer felt foreign to me, its glass corridors and modern furnishings now as familiar as my own apartment. I sat at my desk reviewing quarterly projections, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished surface. The interim had been officially removed from my CEO title 3 months ago, after the board's unanimous vote of confidence. The transformation of Reynolds Industries hadn't been easy. The independent audit had uncovered more irregularities than even I had anticipated. Shadow accounts, questionable partnerships, systematic documentation issues spanning years. Each discovery had been a fresh wound, not just for the company but for me personally. each revelation a reminder of how thoroughly truth had been managed within these walls. But we were healing now, rebuilding on a foundation of transparency rather than appearance. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Marcus entered, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The weight of perpetual performance had lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the earned confidence of actual achievement. "The Phoenix Group Integration Report," he said, placing a folder on my desk. "Ahead of schedule and under budget." I smiled. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised. Just satisfied." He took a seat across from me. "It's different when you're building something real instead of maintaining an illusion." I knew exactly what he meant. For months we'd worked side by side, dismantling the elaborate facades our parents had constructed and replacing them with systems built on substance. Marcus had proven himself not just capable but exceptional. Once freed from the suffocating expectations of perfection, his natural talents had flourished. "Have you seen this?" He slid a business magazine across the desk. Reynolds Industries was featured on the cover, with the headline, "The Transparency Revolution: How New Leadership Transformed a Family Legacy." I skimmed the article, pausing at a paragraph that read, "Under Olivia Reynolds' leadership, the company has increased shareholder value by 27% while implementing unprecedented transparency protocols. What began as a corporate governance crisis has evolved into a case study in ethical reorganization." "Not bad for the daughter they tried to erase," Marcus commented. I closed the magazine. "It was never about recognition." "I know," he said, "but it doesn't hurt." We shared a moment of quiet understanding before he stood to leave. "Don't forget. Town hall meeting at 3. The manufacturing division employees are anxious to hear about the facility upgrades." After he left, I walked to the window, gazing out at the city sprawled below. The Reynolds Industries building cast a long shadow, just as its name had cast a shadow over my life for years. But shadows change with the sun's position. What once seemed permanent was actually fluid, shifting with perspective and time. My parents had left the city shortly after the transition. Diana had resigned from the board entirely, unable to stomach the diminishment of her influence. Richard had kept his board seat but attended meetings remotely, offering little input. They'd retreated to their house in the Hamptons, emerging occasionally for obligatory social functions, but otherwise maintaining a dignified silence about the company's transformation. We hadn't spoken privately since that morning in the boardroom. No reconciliation, no further confrontation, just the clean break of severed expectations. I didn't miss them. Not exactly. What I had mourned was never their actual presence, but the idea of parents who saw me, valued me, included me in their vision. That idealized version had never existed, so there was nothing tangible to grieve. What surprised me most about leadership wasn't the challenges, those I had anticipated, but the profound satisfaction of creating space for others to be seen. Within 6 months, I had promoted overlooked employees, restructured departments to recognize actual contribution rather than political connection, and implemented systems where ideas were evaluated on merit rather than source. The Reynolds Industries of today was not the company I had been excluded from. It was something new, something better, a place where no one was invisible. A notification on my phone reminded me of the upcoming town hall. I gathered my notes and headed toward the elevator, nodding to employees who now met my eyes with respect rather than uncertainty. The manufacturing facility in Burlington had been my first major investment decision as CEO. The modernization plan I had recommended years ago, the one my father had dismissed before quietly implementing aspects of it under Marcus's name, was now being fully realized under my direction. As my car pulled up to the red brick building, I remembered standing here 8 years ago, clutching a proposal my father had never bothered to read. Now employees lined up outside, applauding as I stepped from the vehicle, not from obligation or fear, but from genuine appreciation. Inside, the transformation was evident. New equipment hummed efficiently where outdated machinery had once strained. Natural light streamed through skylights that had replaced the dingy fluorescence. Most importantly, the faces I passed showed pride rather than resignation. The town hall unfolded with honest questions and straightforward answers. No corporate spin, no carefully rehearsed responses, just authentic dialogue about challenges and progress. When an older worker stood and asked about job security through the modernization, I addressed his concern directly. Reynolds Industries isn't just investing in equipment, I told him. We're investing in people. Every employee displaced by automation will be retrained for technical roles at equal or higher pay. No exceptions. The room erupted in applause. Not for a polished corporate line, but for a human commitment. Afterward, as I toured the facility, a woman approached me, gray-haired, weathered hands, eyes bright with intelligence. "Ms. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "I've worked here for 32 years. Knew your grandfather when he used to visit monthly." I shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Helen," she said simply. "Just Helen. I wanted to tell you something. Your grandfather used to say that a company was only as good as its quietest worker. That if you took care of the people no one noticed, everything else would fall into place." Her words struck me deeply. "I never heard that story." She smiled knowingly. "Some stories get lost when the tellers prefer different narratives. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, doesn't it?" As I flew back to the city that evening, Helen's words echoed in my mind. The truth resurfacing. That's exactly what had happened. Not just with the company, but with me. I had been buried under years of careful erasure, but I hadn't disappeared. I had been gathering strength, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The next morning, a familiar name appeared in my inbox, William Bell. The email was brief. "Olivia, Richard has requested a meeting. Your office, tomorrow at 2 p.m. He's coming alone. Your call." My finger hovered over the delete button. There was no business reason to meet. The formal transition was complete, all legal matters settled. Whatever Richard wanted was personal, and I wasn't certain I had anything left to say to him. But curiosity, or perhaps some lingering need for closure, won out. I replied with a single word. "Confirmed." I didn't mention the meeting to Marcus. Whatever Richard wanted, this was between him and me. The following afternoon, my father arrived precisely on time, still impeccably dressed, though noticeably thinner, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. He stood awkwardly just inside my office door, taking in the changes I'd made to the space. Gone were the imposing dark furnishings, the wall of self-congratulatory awards, the carefully staged family photos. In their place, a lighter, more collaborative environment, comfortable seating, functional technology, and art that celebrated innovation rather than tradition. "You've redecorated," he said finally. "I've made it functional," I replied, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit." He did, perching on the edge like a visitor uncertain of his welcome. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history. "The manufacturing facility looks good," he said finally. The quarterly report showed impressive efficiency gains. "We didn't schedule this meeting to discuss operations," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Why are you here, Richard?" He flinched slightly at my use of his first name, a small reminder that our relationship had fundamentally changed. He was no longer Dad, the untouchable authority figure. He was Richard Reynolds, former CEO, minority shareholder. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice rougher than I remembered. "About the company, about the family, about choices I made." I waited, offering neither encouragement nor resistance. "Your mother and I," he continued, then stopped, correcting himself. "No, that's not right. I can't hide behind we anymore. I made choices, Olivia. Choices that hurt you. Choices I can't undo." I studied him carefully, searching for the familiar signs of manipulation, the calculated vulnerability, the strategic remorse that had always preceded requests for forgiveness without change. But something was different. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes, when they met mine, held none of the certainty that had once defined him. "The night of that dinner," he said quietly, "when I stood up and said those things, I knew it was wrong even as I was saying it. I could see it on the faces around me. But I couldn't stop myself. I'd been following your mother's script for so long, I didn't know how to deviate. That doesn't excuse it, I said evenly. No, he agreed immediately. It doesn't. Nothing does. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder. I brought something, not as justification. Just context. I took it cautiously, opening to find medical records. Richard Reynolds, diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease, 18 months prior. I looked up, suddenly seeing the tremor in his hands, the stiffness in his posture with new understanding. Why are you showing me this? Not for sympathy, he said firmly. I don't deserve that. I'm showing you because it forced me to confront my mortality, to evaluate the life I've lived. And I found it lacking. He leaned forward slightly. I spent decades building an image instead of a legacy. I valued appearance over substance. Worst of all, I sacrificed my relationship with my daughter at the altar of corporate politics. I closed the folder, struggling to reconcile this vulnerable man with the father who had stood silently by while I was systematically erased. What do you want from me, Richard? Nothing, he said simply. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect another meeting after this. I just needed you to know that I see it now. All of it. The damage I caused. The opportunities I missed. The daughter I failed to value until it was too late. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. And I needed to tell you that you've built something remarkable here. Not just a successful company, but an ethical one. You've done what I never had the courage to do, prioritized truth over image. I didn't speak, couldn't speak. The knot in my throat precluded words. Your mother won't ever understand, he continued softly. She can't separate herself from the narrative she created. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Olivia. Not that my pride matters anymore. But I am. He stood then, our brief meeting apparently concluded. At the door he paused. One more thing. I've amended my will. My shares in Reynolds Industries will transfer to you upon my death. Not to control, but to secure your vision for the company's future. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with turbulent emotions I hadn't anticipated. I sat motionless for several minutes, processing. This wasn't reconciliation. That would require far more than a single conversation. But it was acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement, not the carefully crafted corporate kind. I wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't sure I ever would be. But something had shifted, not between us, but within me. The anger that had fueled me for so long felt suddenly heavier, more burdensome than empowering. Later that evening, as I prepared for a charity gala I was now attending as CEO rather than reluctant daughter, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Did he come to see you too? So Richard had visited us both. I replied simply, yes. We can talk tomorrow. The charity gala was being held at the same venue where, 6 months earlier, my father had publicly disowned me. The irony wasn't lost on me as I entered the ballroom, now transformed with different decorations but holding the same collected wealth and influence. This time, however, I entered not as a reluctant family member, but as Olivia Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Industries. My name card sat at the head table. My accomplishments were listed in the program. My voice would be heard during the evening's presentations. As I circulated through the pre-dinner reception, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about the company's transformation, I spotted a familiar figure across the room. Diana Reynolds, elegant as ever in midnight blue, holding court among her usual social circle. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away, her expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken since the board meeting 6 months ago. I didn't expect that to change tonight. What surprised me was my own reaction. Not anger, not hurt, just a calm recognition of a chapter closed. Diana had been the architect of my erasure, but she no longer held the pen that wrote my story. The evening progressed smoothly. I delivered a brief speech about Reynolds Industries' new community investment initiatives. I networked with potential partners. I even danced once with the silver-haired CEO of our largest supplier, who who commented on the positive changes he'd observed in company culture. As the event wound down, I found myself alone on the terrace, enjoying a moment of quiet beneath the stars. Footsteps behind me broke the silence. I turned to find Marcus approaching, champagne flute in hand. "Quite a different experience from the last time we were here," he observed, joining me at the railing. "Everything's different now," I agreed. He studied me thoughtfully. "You spoke with Dad yesterday." "I did." "And?" I considered the question. "And nothing, really." He acknowledged mistakes. He expressed regret. "He's sick." Marcus nodded. "Parkinson's. Early stages, but progressing." "Does it change anything for you?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "It explains some things. Doesn't excuse them. But yes, it changes something. Not our past, but maybe how I view the future." We stood in companionable silence, watching the city lights shimmer below. "Mom's leaving for Europe next week," he said finally. "Indefinite stay. I think she can't bear to watch the company evolve without her controlling interest." I wasn't surprised. Diana had always retreated when control slipped from her grasp. "Are you okay with that?" I asked, genuinely curious about his feelings. He considered the question seriously. "I think so. We're building something better than what they left us. Something real." As we prepared to leave, a young woman approached us. Early 20s, bright eyes, nervous energy. She introduced herself as an intern in the marketing department. "Ms. Reynolds," she said, addressing me directly, "I just wanted to thank you. The mentorship program you started, it's changing everything for people like me, people who don't have connections or family names to open doors." Her sincerity was palpable, her gratitude genuine. "What's your name?" I asked. "Zoe," she replied. "Zoe Michaels." "Well, Zoe Michaels," I said, "keep making your voice heard. Reynolds Industries needs people who speak truth, not just what others want to hear." Her smile was radiant as she thanked me again and disappeared back into the crowd. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You've become quite the inspirational figure." I shook my head. "I've just created space for people to be seen. Something no one did for me." The ride home was quiet, the city streets nearly empty in the late hour. As the car pulled up to my building, Marcus hesitated before getting out. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "The Phoenix Group restructuring is complete. The audits are finished. The company's stable now, thriving even." "Your point?" I asked, sensing something significant in his tone. "My point is that we've been so focused on fixing what was broken, we haven't thought about what comes next, what we want to build, not just what we need to repair." He had my full attention now. "I've been developing a proposal," he continued, "a new division focused on ethical innovation. Not just profitable products, but solutions that address real problems: climate change, accessibility, economic inequality." His eyes lit up as he spoke, passion evident in every word. "We'd start small, incubate ideas that larger corporations typically ignore, because the profit margins aren't immediately obvious. We'd take risks our competitors won't, because we'd be measuring success differently." "That's ambitious," I said, genuinely impressed. "The board will have questions." "Let them question," he replied with newfound confidence. "We've earned the right to lead with vision, not just damage control." As we said goodnight, I realized something fundamental had shifted between us. We weren't just siblings reluctantly working together to fix a broken inheritance. We were partners building something neither of us could create alone. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, my mind already racing with possibilities sparked by Marcus's proposal. I made coffee and settled on my balcony, watching the sunrise illuminate the city. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Diana Reynolds announces European Arts Foundation, separate from family business. I skimmed the article. My mother had reinvented herself, as she always did when circumstances changed. She'd created a new narrative where her departure from Reynolds Industries was a planned transition, a deliberate choice to pursue philanthropic interests. No mention of corporate restructuring, family conflict, or the daughter now leading the company she'd built. I set the phone aside, unsurprised. Diana would always control the story she told, even if that story diverged increasingly from reality. What mattered wasn't her narrative anymore. It was mine. Ours. The one Marcus and I were writing together, not with careful image management but with authentic leadership and ethical choices. I opened my laptop and began drafting notes for the upcoming leadership retreat. Ideas for Marcus's proposed division, structural changes to further embed transparency into company culture, expansion plans built on substance rather than appearance. As I worked, the sun climbed higher, washing my apartment in warm light. On my bookshelf, the old family photo, the one where I hadn't been cropped out, caught the morning rays. I hadn't looked at it closely in months, too busy building the future to dwell on the past. I walked over and picked it up, studying the younger versions of ourselves. Richard and Diana in the center, perfect and poised. Marcus to the right, already learning to perform. And me on the left, slightly awkward, not quite fitting the polished family image, but undeniably present. They had tried to erase me from that picture, from their narrative, from the legacy they so carefully controlled. But you can't erase what refuses to disappear. I placed the photo back on the shelf, not as a painful reminder, but as a milestone on a journey that had led me here, to this moment, to this life I had built on my own terms. My phone rang. Marcus, already at the office despite the early hour, eager to discuss his proposal in detail. "I hope I'm not calling too early," he began. "Not at all," I replied. "I've been thinking about your idea. It has potential, but we need to approach it strategically." "I knew you'd say that," he laughed. "That's why I've already drafted a 3-phase implementation plan. When can you meet?" As we scheduled time to collaborate, I felt a surge of purpose that had nothing to do with proving my worth or claiming my place. This wasn't about the past anymore. The slights, the erasures, the public disowning. This was about creating something meaningful, something lasting. They had disowned me at a dinner meant to celebrate legacy. They never imagined that in doing so, they had freed me to build a legacy of my own. One founded on substance rather than appearance, on contribution rather than connection. I had once been defined by their rejection. Now I was defined by my vision, my values, my voice. And that voice would no longer be silenced. I gathered my things and headed toward the office, toward the future I was now empowered to shape. The company that once erased me now bore the imprint of my leadership in every department, every decision, every value it upheld. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people who should have protected you. But healing doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward on your own terms. I had done exactly that, not by seeking revenge or validation, but by creating something better than what I had lost, a company where everyone was seen, a leadership style that valued substance over image, and a legacy built on truth rather than carefully managed perceptions. The daughter they had disowned now owned their company, but more importantly, she owned her story. And that was the most powerful ownership of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.